Welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, May 30th. I am the host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and today we go to Fort Hall, Idaho, where we talk with one of our regular correspondents, Mark Trahant, about the politics of politics. Romney has enough delegates to get the nomination for the Republican Party on the first ballot. Here's Mark. Mark Trahant, thanks for joining with us on the Native News Update. Mitt Romney won 105 delegates last night, and it sounds like he might be over the hump. Tell me what you're seeing.
He's officially going to be the Republican nominee, and now it's a question of him versus Obama.
Okay, and this puts him in what you call a first round win, or is that not done yet? Does he got the magic number locked up here very tightly?
Yes, he now has the magic number. First delegate count, he'll have enough votes, and that'll be it. So now the fight will be on really minor things like who gets speaking time at the convention, what resolutions are passed, what'll be the official platform of the Republican Party, that sort of thing.
What impact is the effect of Ron Paul's delegates? Quite a few. In fact, people were saying in Minnesota, they've locked up the Republican Party in a lot of ways internally through processes, as they have in some other places where they gained access to what you call the excess delegates. Does that do anything for Ron Paul, good or bad for Romney?
It sure does. One thing it does is it allows him to take over the party apparatus in many states, where they'll be putting Ron Paul people as committee chairman, as precinct and on up level politicians. It'll also allow them to have a lot of influence on the platform, where they want more of a free market, anti-government platform to be the one that becomes known for the party. It's important to remember that Ron Paul isn't as much a politician as a movement. And his movement is basically small, very small government conservative, reactionary in many ways.
Okay, and is he laying this groundwork for Ron Paul or Rand Paul?
Well, in many ways, he's laying it for Rand Paul, but I don't think they really care who the candidate is. They really want to change the way the United States government, they want to go back to the U.S. government before the Civil War, basically, when the states were the dominant power.
Okay, and let's just take that whole idea, because we seem to be moving from the far right of the Tea Party into libertarian type policies of freedom. Tell me about the differences between those factions in the Republican Party.
Where you really see it most pronounced is in foreign policy, where the Ron Paul supporters do not want the United States entangled in any foreign operations. Other Republicans, more traditional Republicans, see the United States as a world leader and the ones who decide things. It's really interesting because the world has changed so much in the last 20 years that the United States just doesn't have that same kind of power anymore. It still has influence and it still can do things, but in terms of deciding how the world is run in either Washington or New York, that's just not going to happen. So they kind of align in some ways with liberal folks on their view of the United States.
Trying to stay out of other people's businesses and focus on our own?
Right. Even Syria. Syria is a good example of that. A lot of the Republican supporters of Mitt Romney are calling for more U.S. support for the opposition forces, including arming them. And the Ron Paul folks are saying, back off. That's Syria's business. It's not ours. They'll figure it out.
When we look at that philosophy, in that Ron Paul movement of liberty, we find policies like let's deregulate all the drug laws and let people, consume. Legalize marijuana, legalize other things, kind of let those social issues work on their own? Or is that something about trying to let states decide what needs to be done in those local turfs? Is that what it is?
It is. And I think it's this idea of America at another time when people could be free to do those kind of things without interference from the state. But what they fail to I guess, put into their planning is that when that type of atmosphere was present, the United States was roughly under 100 million people, and now it's 300 million people. And so it's very difficult with 300 million people being individuals to not infringe on somebody else pretty quickly. A good example of that is helmet laws. A lot of states that are libertarian like to have no helmet laws for motorcycle riders. And if the person who's riding the motorcycle were to pay all of their medical costs every time they had an accident, that would be one thing. But it doesn't work that way. When there's an accident, all of society has to chip in to pay some of the medical costs. And that's why there are laws, basically.
And this whole idea of the United States being more uniform, does that at all fall into the perspective of global uniformity in a lot of ways?
I think that's part of their angst, is that there's so much pressure now for kind of global standards in some areas. And it makes them uneasy to have the United States be a part of that process. One of the things that really sets them off is when U.S. courts cite international law as precedent. They
Okay.
see that as a complete affront to U.S. sovereignty. We decide these things, not the International Court at The Hague.
Wouldn't that be something that both the Tea Parties and the Libertarians would agree on, I suspect, from looking at those
Absolutely.
policies? And where does Obama fit into this? It seems, when you look at some of things that seem to be very conservative, for example, I was reading yesterday about how he almost individually oversees the list of people in Al Qaeda who are to be assassinated and gives the go ahead or not. He's almost micromanaging that military campaign, which a lot of people wouldn't think he'd be involved in. Would you?
Well, and in a sense he is, but I think what they're doing there is sending a message to the rest of the world, namely Pakistan and Afghanistan, that the President of the United States takes these missions very seriously and is going to be deliberate and thoughtful before he orders a missile strike. So that it's not just some colonel at some level taking off and shooting these things.
Yeah. Can Obama be accused of being soft on terrorism in any way, form, or fashion?
No, he's been the same as George Bush in almost every checklist you can go down.
That's interesting because I mean that's what I hear a lot of my more liberal, progressive friends saying is that on military policy and some of these things, Obama is as much as a conservative Democrat as he could be a moderate Republican in the sense of that.
Right, right. I mean, that's what is interesting about the sheer amount of emotional reaction to Obama from conservatives and Tea Party and libertarians is the record doesn't match their rhetoric. I mean, they seem to have this real vitriolic view of Obama that's deep in their passion for being this great liberal. And as someone who's considerably to the left of Obama, I can tell you with a straight face, he is not.
Right. And yet he's accused of being a socialist and way out on the left of everything, and yet his policies don't, to me and to you and other people, don't seem to reflect that. The
He's
battle,
centrist.
yeah, the battle's on. What do we see now? All posturing between now and November, and analysis of those states that swing to the right and left and may do something. What do you know about that?
Well, I can give you one of two answers. The first one's what I really think, and the second one's probably a more political one. The first one is neither candidate controls this election. If the economy improves, Obama wins. If the economy continues to deteriorate, like it seems to have been the last couple of weeks, Mitt Romney will be the next president.
Okay, well, let's ask this. A couple of months ago, Obama was being accused of having to do with the rise in gas prices, and he wasn't doing anything about it. The gas prices are going down. Isn't that in his favor then? All of a sudden, does he get
That
credit
is,
for lowering the price of gasoline now?
oh, sure. And if the election were held today, he would probably win. He would carry Ohio. He had the latest poll had him up by about 6 points in Ohio, which is a state a Republican can't afford to lose. He's winning in Pennsylvania, another state the Republicans would like to pick up. Florida, he was behind in, but the Democrats didn't need it anyway. So they start with a pretty good head start. Um, the problem comes in that the trend lines are going the wrong direction. gas prices are going down because the economy is getting worse.
Right.
And that is a bigger issue. I mean, we still have the highest jobless rate since the Great Depression. When you take people out of the labor force, it's even greater than the official numbers. And it's weakening. And a lot depends on what happens in Athens, what happens in Spain. I mean, it's so much out of control of either candidate that they're just kind of riding a whale.
Well, that's interesting. We're kind of riding a shark in Wisconsin here. We've got this recall election in 5 days, and people are going to be turning out. And the question is whether or not there's any long-term implications if Walker should be returned to office. People are going to say basically that was a failure of the unions, and therefore the decision to end collective bargaining, as we know it in Wisconsin, was a proper decision. And the DNC and other people are trying to say that even if Walker survives this recall, that it's not going to have that much of an impact on the November 4th election. What are you feeling or seeing out there about Wisconsin and the impact of that?
Well, Wisconsin's a very important state for the Democrats in November. And if they can put together a coalition to take Walker down and use this as a practice, I think it augurs well for the president's reelection. By the flip side, if they can't put a coalition now, when things have been so intense over the last 2 years and where there's been so much interest in this, then I think it's going to be tough to get people even more inspired come November. So I think it's a pretty important election.
The polls show either a close race or Walker ahead. There are people that are saying how it looks on the ground is a little bit different, that the polls are wrong. Internal polls show a very tight race. They say it all has to do with turnout. Where does the native vote fit into this in a close rate? In Wisconsin, they probably poll 40, 50,000 votes throughout the state, maybe less than that, but considerably 2% across the country.
Can the Indians get a high turnout is probably the question. If they could boost the numbers even 3 or 4%, it could be pretty significant.
Could be the tipping point.
Sure.
We'll be watching to see if that happens, and we'll keep in touch as this election goes on. We want to get down to native policy issues and what we may see coming out of Romney and out of Obama after 4 years already.
Very good.
Thanks for joining with us, Mark. Take care.
Okay.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you for joining with us, and come back many, many times.